Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give folks a little bit more time to get on in here. I know folks are running from some of the last sessions or tuning in for the first time this morning, depending on what part of the country and or world y'all are in. So I'll give you guys a few more moments to join us, and we'll get started in probably a minute or two here. All right, my friends. Good morning and welcome to Hello World 101. My name is Gemini Powell. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a freelance web developer at Texas Web Gems. Here with y'all today to teach y'all some basics about HTML and CSS. We're going to go over what these terms even mean. We're going to touch some base on how to navigate them. And towards the end, we'll have a bit of an interactive project for those of us who are tuned in and have the ability to access code. And we'll walk through creating our first web page. Let's go ahead and get started. I always like to start these things off with a bit of a quote to get us into the mood of coding. Today's quote comes from Ellen Ullman. She's the author of By Blood, which is a really good book to read. You guys should definitely add it to your selection. One of her most famous quotes to date, there is always one more bug to fix. It's often believed in the programming world that, for those of us who fix bugs, the act of programming is putting the bugs in and the act of debugging is getting them out. Just getting into the basics of what we're going to cover here with you today. We're going to go over HTML. We're going to talk about what it is and why we need it to build the internet. We're also going to talk about CSS, what that even means, and what we can do in our web pages with them, and we'll put it together. So just talking about HTML real quick. What is it and why does it power just about everything on the World Wide Web? As far as HTML, it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Essentially, in today's day and age with the internet, this is the integral building block that builds just about everything on the web. Any web page you see, it's being served by HTML on the front side. Every bit of text you see, color changes, etc., all of these have mostly been pushed through to HTML one way or another, regardless of what we're building in when we build websites. Let's see here. Now, you guys may have noticed on the last slide there was this weird thing in brackets. There was a P. That is known as a paragraph block, and that block is the fundamental building block by which we pretty much start anything HTML-wise. These bits and pieces, there's a P and there's a couple more that we'll see along the way. They are called HTML elements. Each and every one of them serves a purpose and can be pulled, whether it is to design them in CSS or to give them actions in other ways. When you're looking at code, you may see headings, which can be anything H1, H2, all the way to H6. And those are essentially meant to emphasize certain things, titles, subtitles, things like that. You also may see things called divs, which literally is short for divider, or sections. And this allows us to actually create layouts, which we will talk about in a little bit when we talk a little bit more about CSS. Now, touching on CSS real quickly, just having an understanding of what it is and how it allows us to sort of make our HTML pretty. It is definitely a very dynamic medium that allows us to add style and layout to our pages. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It's a layout and styling medium that lets us design and format our page elements. In CSS, they're called selectors as opposed to elements. We can color them, we can add images to our pages, we can change the way the page is formed, but the whole key is that CSS doesn't change any of the content that was already created in HTML. It just makes it look prettier, makes it look better on the page. You can make words glow, you can make words take shape, you can take entire sections of pages and color them, give them gradients artistically. There's all sorts of things you can do from a design perspective with CSS. And the lovely thing about it is you have the ability to kind of link these things together such that they function they function as if a puzzle put together. Now, why are these cascading? To talk about the cascade and cascading style sheets, of course. So whenever things are defined in CSS, they are defined by something called a cascaded value. It's the best way to explain it is that the system, the system is essentially created to judge how important the design of one characteristic is over another. This specific cascaded value defines specificity or the importance of the change of an element. Now, each and every HTML element can have some basics, that sort of allow them to be pulled and defined. We have selectors of ID, which can be determined by a hashtag or # for those of us who are millennials and older. By class, which can be defined by a period before a term, or type selectors, which is essentially, selecting the P for paragraph or selecting the H itself for heading and being able to modify that. There is a particular term within cascading style sheets. One of my mentors calls it bang important, and bang, of course, is in reference to the exclamation point. Whenever you see this in CSS, this is a rule that's pretty much without many exceptions going to override other rules on your CSS sheet or other what we call declarations on your CSS sheet. Sort of no matter what happens, this is always going to be a thing. So if you're writing on a page and you're writing CSS code and you want all the text to be black, you can set the color of the text to black and then add bang important to that in order to essentially say the text on this page will be black no matter what until I say otherwise. As far as how you can connect the CSS to your existing HTML code, to your existing page, you've got 3 ways of pulling that in. You can pull it in inline, and that's essentially being able to add the styling to an HTML element directly. You can also do it internally, which is styling it within the head of the page. And we'll go a little deeper into what the head of the page and what the body of the page are in just a bit. And you can also use a separate CSS file and actually connect it externally. Most developers prefer to go this route so that we keep the code separated by what it does. HTML provides the content, CSS provides the styling, and we want to make sure that we separate those concerns so we don't get the code confused for future developers who might want to read that code, parse that code, and utilize it. So how do we make this happen? How do we make a little bit of text become this blurb that just says hello world on a page? We need a few ingredients in order to make our page stick, make our page stand. To make our page, we're going to want to have what is called an IDE, or an Integrated Development Editor. If anybody took a chance to look at some of the blurb information prior to hopping in here, they may have noticed that there was a link for something called VS Code, which is short for Visual Studio Code. This is one of the most commonly used editors in the industry. I myself have been using it faithfully for the better part of the last 3 or 4 years of coding myself. And as far as it's concerned, it's probably the most comprehensive of the editors that exists. One of my favorite things about it is that it has extensions that kind of allow you to make the job a little easier, to allow you to build these boilerplates and learn more about how they're made by seeing how they're built. Beyond that, we're going to need a boilerplate, which we will work on creating here. And that's just essentially the basic bare bones of the web page to make sure that the page functions and doesn't break on impact. We'll be able to style some of that with CSS, add some color, and then we'll need to link our style sheet to our HTML page in order to actually utilize that styling. Now, some of you may be asking, how do you link these two things? How do you make sense of them such that they function cooperatively? We're going to walk through that. Now, we can link the two pages in a number of ways. Again, the preferred way is linking it through a separate CSS file. What you'll see at the top left in the code screenshot there is a specific sort of phrase that is kind of used to link the spreadsheet, starting with link, rel equals style sheet, and then referencing the style sheet itself. We'll go a bit deeper into what exactly that means in just a few moments. But that's just a basic boilerplate setup in HTML. And then on the right side, you'll see a couple of CSS things here. This probably looks a little weird compared to what's on the left side, and that's because the syntax is a little different. But to get to the basics, essentially to create your basic web page, you're going to write your HTML, you're going to style it with CSS, you're going to link those files, and you're going to call it a day, essentially. All right, let's put these pieces together. Bits and steps. Now, when you're putting together the page, you want to start off by building the head of the page. The head of the page contains a lot of information that most people on the other side, on the outside viewing the web page, won't necessarily see. It essentially determines what language your page is going to be in, the type font that's going to be used, as well as your page's title when it gets searched, a description of the page, and as we will learn when we close, you often add the style sheet in there to add styling as well. The body is where you put your content, your page elements, your hello world, your paragraphs and headings, and everything you want people to read, essentially. And of course, as mentioned, at the end, you want to make sure you link your style sheet in the head after building the file so that you can go ahead and actually see the styling that you're making. Let's do a quick hop in and look at some live code. For those of you who have gone ahead and downloaded and installed Visual Studio Code, or if you've installed any editor at this point, you can go ahead and open that. We're going to actually take a look at some live code here so that we can understand what's going on within the code. Just a couple of things to keep in mind as you are coding, especially when it comes to HTML and CSS. Always close your elements. This was one of the biggest mistakes that I made when I was first learning how to code, is that I would open my elements and then put the things in there and then wonder why nothing was working. So ultimately, you want to make sure you close your elements, because that allows essentially the statement of the HTML element to function on its own. If you don't close the elements, everything kind of gets jumbled together, and there's going to be an error that probably breaks the page. This is especially important for things like lists. If you'll see on the left side, there's some text in green that says UL. That is one of the types of lists that you can create. It's called an unordered list. And essentially, if you don't close your elements inside an unordered list, the list will never get created. It will look like a jumble. So please close your elements in HTML, and please close your brackets in CSS. Coming back to the mention before of the rel style sheet and referencing the style sheet, this line is required to connect your external CSS file. You cannot connect that CSS file without this line being in the head of your HTML. Ultimately, what it's telling the HTML file to do is to go look for and attach to this HTML file a style sheet by this name in this place that's going to define what this all looks like that we're about to put in the body. Now, as mentioned before, of course, the head contains a lot of data that the user doesn't see, but it also contains some metadata that the user can see, like the title of the page, the description of the page. These things are especially important to add, not just to, park your page somewhere, but to also have a title and description that can be indexed. When you put your page up publicly, you want Google to be able to find it. And if it doesn't have a title and description, Google can't find it. So you want to make sure that you're adding that metadata in. I can show y'all what that looks like here in just a moment. Some people, when they're going through, are trying to figure out in their content whether to use a heading, paragraph, a divider, etc. A lot of it's going to depend on the content you're putting out. Most people are going to use headings for titles, subtitles, certain emphasized texts, and we'll use paragraphs for much everything else. Whenever you're going into detail about something, like you see news articles, for example, you have the title, which is in heading form, and then you have the article, which is largely in paragraph form. Let's take a look at a boilerplate. Right. So this is an example of a standard HTML boilerplate. We're going to go line by line here. Up here at the first line, you'll see exclamation point or bang, doc type HTML. And that's just defining the type of document that we're using. Pretty straightforward there. Once you've defined the document, you're sort of defining the parameters of the document or how the document is going to function before you start building it. That's the purpose of the head of the HTML. Here in the head, you will also see meta charset UTF-8. Now, that's just going to look like straight foreign to a lot of folks because what's UTF-8? Just a simple breakdown. We use what is called Unicode format in order to essentially make everything readable. That fancy set of letters is saying we're using Unicode to make sure that this can be readable in every language it could potentially be translated in. What you will often see in code sometimes is something similar to also adding. Let me go ahead and connect it. All right. And let's go ahead and switch screens. I'm going to show y'all some live code real quick. No. All right, so pulling up the live code. Let's see if it pulls up here. All right, here we go. All right, and here on the live code, you will see that I have in here HTML lang equals EN. So we're able to also set the language natively. And in here, I have English. This can also be modified to be English US or English Great Britain. So it goes by the understanding of languages. And no matter what language you use, this funky little code right here that allows us to use the Unicode format will ensure that it is viewed properly in any language the editor and browser can read. Of course, here we've got the title, which of course is our hello world. And here, this is just giving the simple descriptor of the title. This as well is that line we were talking about, adding the link to the style sheet, referencing the link style.css, and even giving the type for the link, which this is optional, but a lot of developers like to include it just to make sure future developers can read the code and understand what's going on. This is essentially a basic head. This will get you by on your first web page without much issue. And of course, here in the body, you have your content, which is simply hello world. Now, if we want to take a quick look at how this looks, we have the opportunity to open this up in the browser. And when we open this up in the browser, we can get a look at what we have created with just these few lines of code. Right. There we go. And there we go. Now, that bit and piece simply created a screen that says hello world. That's all we've done. Now, what you might notice is that the screen is black with white text. Under normal circumstances, the screen would probably be white with black text, but we went ahead and attached our style sheet. So our style sheet has some things that we might want to look at so that we understand what's going on here. Let's go ahead and flip over to our style sheet and see what is happening here. All right. Heading over to our style sheet as it pops up here, we're going to see a couple of strange things. First thing we're going to notice is that things are in different types of brackets. That is intentional. So instead of using the sort of greater than, lesser than signs, or what we call angled brackets that are typically used in HTML, CSS and a number of other coding languages use these curly brackets to sort of define terms. And so the reason the background, of course, was black on that page was because I went ahead and took the entire body of the page. I set the background color, which is one of the CSS properties, something we can use for design here, to black, and set it to the earlier mentioned bang important, which means that no matter what I do to this page, until I give a rule otherwise that is more important than this, the page is going to stay black forever. The text is going to stay white unless I give it a different rule. And the font size is going to stay 16px, which is just short for pixels. Those of you who are relatively familiar with, Microsoft Word or relatively familiar with pixel size, these are essentially real size pixels that create our text. What you'll also notice down here is that I've done a bit of a modification on the font size in the P or paragraph portion that we created here for Hello World. It is set at 0.75 EM. Now, explaining EMs and REMs can get very convoluted, but the very simple way of explaining it is that font size that I set in the body, I'm essentially setting percentages of it throughout. So 0.75 EM essentially translates to 3/4 of this size right here, which means that this font, instead of 16px, would end up being 12px, which, of course, with bang important, it will stay 12px forever. Those two things are basically the same thing. If, to get deeper in the terms, of course you can, but the basic understanding is this is how things are sort of measured, either by pixels or by percentages of pixels, essentially. All right. Back to the scene of the action and getting back into this boilerplate here. Now, getting back into the boilerplate of things, we now have a basic understanding here of what the head stands for, what the body stands for, and this allows us to go ahead and build these things out. Now, building a CSS sheet is a little different from building your typical HTML, because you're styling, you're picking things out. Now, syntax, as I mentioned before, it's a little different, but still essentially pretty straightforward. HTML elements, as mentioned before, are in fact selectors in CSS. We can take those elements and select them by what they are. We can select them by their class or ID if we add a class or ID, and we can utilize that to modify their design properties. We can set full page style changes like the background color on the body that we saw earlier. We can also group selector changes, so you can change a paragraph and a section, or you can change a paragraph and a heading all at once. You can also add animations. Animations have relatively limited support in CSS because we do typically use something else for that called JavaScript, and that usually manages behavior on a page. That's a deep dive, and I have a ton of resources if anyone wants them for JavaScript, but that's a deeper dive into sort of the behavior of a page and things like that. But CSS animations are a little bit of a workaround that you can use to get some fun and funky things happening on a page if you want to. You know, you can make things roll around on the page. You can make the page scroll up and down based on some of these existing animations and transitions. Now, just to cover the basics that we've kind of already come down to, HTML is going to build the page content out. CSS goes ahead and styles it, gives it a layout, gives the content a place to essentially sit on the page. And once you have those two things, you can essentially build a basic web page. Once you've built the basic web page, every single one of you in this chat can officially call yourselves a web developer because you built your first web page. You know, there are definitely different frameworks and models, of course, that you can utilize to build a web page. The internet is not a monolith and can be built a million ways. I think anybody who's in here who is a web developer or software engineer can probably confirm that for you, for sure. But you know, one of the things that I enjoy in particular about HTML and CSS is just how simple it is to get up and going. You know, it's 15, maybe 20 lines of straightforward code, and suddenly in front of you, you have an image that shows you, hey, this is a place I can park something on the internet. I just created this. Let's go put it somewhere. Awesome. As far as resources to continue expanding on HTML and CSS and just how powerful these two things are and what they can do to power our internet, especially in conjunction with other things. We've got a ton of resources here. W3 Schools is actually one of my favorite resources to utilize. It is very beginner friendly, and it contains just about everything you need to know when it comes to HTML, when it comes to CSS, when it comes to navigating selectors and navigating the importance of an element and how to make it display on a page. That's one of the best places you can go. I also have a bit of a soft spot for the MDN web docs. This is largely how I relearned to code over the years. It's a really good way to kind of refresh yourself on some of those deeper methods of what is going wrong here, why is it going wrong, and how do we fix it? It's a very good place to troubleshoot. Some other learning resources that I and some of my fellow devs have used over the years is Free Code Camp. They've got resources for HTML and CSS, as well as JavaScript, which of course, as mentioned before, you can use for function and behavior on a page. Shay How is also an excellent resource, in particular for learning the basics of CSS, especially layouts, figuring out how to put things on a page, all the different ways that you can essentially take something and run it anywhere on a page that you want, and why you can run it that way. I'd also recommend a lot of folks to look into the 100 Devs Academy and 100 Devs Bootcamp. A lot of what I utilize today as a web developer is actually thanks to that program. And everything that I taught y'all today, I learned in depth from that program. It is a wonderful resource for anyone looking to learn to code, whether you're just getting some basics on the front end or you want to do the whole nine and learn how to work the back end and play around with databases and be a super cool software engineer. I want to thank you all for your time today. If anyone has any questions, of course, we'll bring them forward in the Q&A here in just a moment. You can also reach out to me. My website and email are right here if anyone wants to run that down, or if anyone wants to connect with me here in the event, so that, we can learn together. Because, for what it's worth, I know a lot of folks that are in here right now are also either interested in coding or already active in the coding world. And it'd be nice to just share a perspective with y'all. So definitely happy to connect with y'all. Thank you for your time and for sharing space with me today and for learning a bit of Hello World with me. Thank you. Go ahead and pop over. All right. Yeah. Taking a quick look at the chat. Wanted to make sure we're checking some stuff out. Yeah. I see a couple of other 100 devers in here. Yeah. Ironically enough, I also discovered TransTech through 100 devs myself. Many of the folks who were displaced from work through the pandemic turned to 100 devs to learn new skills over the course of the pandemic. It's run by this guy, Leon Noel, and that man's an inspiration. He's incredible. But I found the TransTech community through 100 devs and was an attendee at the TransTech Summit last year, and was so inspired at the end of the summit that I said, hey, if folks like me can get out here and share something, let me go ahead and share a little bit of what I know with, my fellow sisters, brothers, and everyone in between. And let's learn together. Let's grow together. And so, it's awesome being here with you guys. This is my second TransTech, and just happy to be here with y'all and to, share with y'all like y'all shared with me. Y'all inspired me, and so I'm giving it back. Open for any Q&As, questions and answers. If anyone's got anything to break down or wants me to break down anything. But beyond that, I guess I can give y'all a little bit of your time back. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got going on here screen-wise. All right. As far as the JavaScript resources, yes, I can share a ton of JavaScript resources. Let me go ahead and hop along in here. So as far as JavaScript resources, you can find a lot of information about JavaScript on FreeCodeCamp. So FreeCodeCamp essentially has, I think it's upwards of 35 or 40 now, workshops of various languages that you might want to learn. If you want to get deeper into HTML, you can learn that there. If you want to get deeper into JavaScript itself, you can learn that there. React and all sorts of different libraries and algorithms. FreeCodeCamp is probably one of the most ever-present resources that I've seen in in the coding world. If you want to just pick up coding from like start, jump, day zero, they'll go over the basics of HTML and CSS probably in a good bit more detail than I did because I've only got limited time, of course. But you can also learn tons about JavaScript there. One of my favorite resources to really dig deeply into JavaScript as well is JavaScript 101. The website for that is javascript101.info. And that is essentially a giant JavaScript textbook that's available on the internet if you want to get super deep into the concepts that run JavaScript. functions and objects and arrays. Those of you who are devs in the chat are super familiar with this. And then, of course, I mean, if anyone's got any questions on learning or understanding on JavaScript, feel free to reach out to me because JavaScript is what I do and what I know. I'm happy to answer any questions or help walk some folks through some things that might not be so familiar. Any advice around affordable hosting services with the capacity for e-commerce? You're asking the real questions in the chat, my friend, because I'm still looking. Hosting has gotten to be quite expensive over the years. I remember when I first started my journey that like $20 out of your bank account a month could probably keep your website running for years on end. And it's gotten a lot more expensive to host websites just because hosting now does a lot more than it used to. Let's see, what would I recommend as a hosting service? I personally have just used Google because everything I do is connected to Google. So for ease, I have used Google. I would say for anyone who's already familiar with the Google framework, Google Domains just over the last few months essentially sold all of their rights to domain hosting over to Squarespace. And the experience is good. It's a little on the pricey end, but the experience is good. As far as affordable hosting services, honestly, can't really go wrong with a Squarespace or a Wix or a GoDaddy. Anything else, you're probably going to find a lot of random issues with along the way. I am of the opinion that, you know, when it comes to hosting, you get what you pay for. And we don't love it that we're in a world where it's much a pay-to-play game, but like, you know, I pay a little extra, but my servers stay up. So, you know, quality definitely matters, when it comes to that perspective. I would definitely say Squarespace is probably going to be top recs when it comes to hosting. Wix is solid, and they've got their own editor, even if you kind of want to go bottom to top with building a page and make it relatively easy with some no-code tools or low-code tools. Do I utilize GitHub to store my projects or recommend another source? That's a really difficult question, actually, because I do use GitHub to store my projects for the most part. Happy to go ahead and share my GitHub with anyone who's interested. But also, I mean, it kind of just depends on the flavor of what you want. Most of them kind of do the same thing at a point. You can store your code on GitHub, and you can use GitHub pages to actually host the pages live. But, you know, for folks who have been doing this for a while, we kind of know there are a bit of limitations when it comes to hosting your things on GitHub as a solution. As far as storing code, GitHub is great. GitLab is another great example. And these things all function very much routine the same way. So it's pick your favorite flavor. Pick the web page color you like. If you like this web page color, go with that one. They're much the same at a certain point. Ooh, excellent question. From perspective, the industry appears to be moving heavily towards TypeScript. Do you have an opinion on whether new devs should start with that versus JavaScript? So I have a perspective on this, and I am of the opinion that you are a better user of TypeScript if you know JavaScript very well. When it came to my experience, I had to learn TypeScript on the fly. One of the things that, for the 100 devers in here, many of you may remember that we had to kind of lock down a first client relatively quickly. And I was able to lock down my first client within a matter of weeks. And my first client wanted me to build a full stack blog with its own content management system on the back, and wanted it to be secure, and specifically asked me to use TypeScript. And I'm like, I know JavaScript, so I don't really know what's going on here. So Here's the thing about TypeScript. If you know JavaScript, TypeScript is useful for security reasons, but TypeScript is also incredibly easy to learn if you already have the JavaScript basis, because it's just a flavor of JavaScript that is a little more specific. There are a couple of terms in there that you'll get used to. You'll get used to navigating types and specifying things in functions, but it's essentially really specific, really fancy, really formalized TypeScript. And most of your pages that you build will work one way or the other. It's just, what do you want to do for whatever your client wants? Some projects I use TypeScript because they want that additional layer of security. But most of the time, I'm just coding in regular JavaScript. It's not going to break unless you break it at a point. All right. All right. Let's see, do we have any other questions along the way? Let's take a look here. Right. I think someone earlier, let's see. All right. I think that's about it. Looks like that is a wrap on Q&As. Again, my information's right on the screen here for anybody to take down. If y'all have further questions or want any further information. But aside from that, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of your time back to get a breathing room before the next session. Much love to every single one of you for staying here, sticking it out with me, and appreciate y'all's perspective, y'all's takes, and sharing my story and sharing a little bit of knowledge with y'all. Take care.